How many lives can a single lie destroy? For 30-year-old Claire Donovan, a server at Boston's most exclusive private dining club, that question became devastatingly real the night she served dinner to corporate titan Victoria Ashford. For Victoria, the 72-year-old CEO of Ashford Industries, whose pharmaceutical empire had shaped modern medicine, it was the moment a secret she'd buried for 5 decades erupted into the present. Claire was simply trying to pay for her sister's experimental cancer treatments that insurance refused to cover. Victoria was attending a routine board dinner, but when Claire noticed the antique ruby locket around Victoria's neck, identical to the one her sister wore, every day a casual compliment would trigger a cascade of revelations that would expose medical fraud, corporate conspiracy, and a family torn apart by greed. This isn't about jewelry. This is about how power protects itself, how truth can be weaponized, and how sometimes the people who seem weakest possess the strength to bring down empires. Some secrets are kept not to protect the innocent, but to shield the guilty. And when those secrets finally surface, they burn everything they touch. But one cold November evening, a simple observation would ignite a firestorm that would consume one of America's most respected corporate dynasties. The Beacon Club occupied the top floor of a historic building in Boston's financial district, its windows offering panoramic views of the harbor and skyline. Claire navigated the dining room with practiced efficiency, balancing trays of artisanal courses for patrons who spent more on a single meal than she earned in a week. The dress code was strict: black designer uniform, minimal jewelry, hair in a professional updo. She'd learned to blend into the background, become part of the expensive furniture. Her shift started at 4, and by 7:30, her calves burned from hours in heels designed more for aesthetics than comfort. But she smiled through it, because every tip brought her closer to affording another month of her sister Emma's treatment. Stage 1 ovarian cancer at 26. The diagnosis had come like a lightning strike, sudden and devastating. The experimental immunotherapy showed promise, but at $40,000 per treatment cycle, it was bankrupting them both. Victoria Ashford arrived at 7:45 with an entourage of executives and board members. Claire had served her before. The woman was a fixture at the club, hosting power dinners that shaped Boston's business landscape. At 72, Victoria was formidable rather than frail. Her steel-grey hair cut in a severe bob, her Chanel suit perfectly tailored. She radiated the kind of authority that came from building a pharmaceutical empire from nothing. "Good evening, Mrs. Ashford," Claire said, approaching the large corner table with menus. "Welcome back to the Beacon Club." Victoria glanced up, her sharp hazel eyes assessing Claire with the brief, dismissive interest wealthy people showed service workers. "Thank you. We'll start with a bottle of the Chateau Margaux 2005. Bring it now." "Of course, ma'am." As Claire turned to retrieve the wine, she caught sight of the locket around Victoria's neck. It hung from a delicate platinum chain, the oval locket itself, crafted from rose gold and set with a large oval ruby surrounded by a halo of tiny pearls. But it was the engraving on the front that stopped Claire's heart. An intricate pattern of intertwined roses, each petal so finely detailed it looked like actual flowers frozen in metal. Emma wore an identical locket. Their mother, Sarah Donovan, had given it to Emma on her 16th birthday, calling it a family treasure passed down through 3 generations. The engraving was distinctive, unmistakable. Claire had traced those metal roses with her fingers hundreds of times while sitting beside Emma's hospital bed. Claire's hands shook slightly as she poured the wine minutes later. She tried to push the coincidence from her mind. Maybe the design wasn't as unique as their mother had claimed. Maybe it was a popular Victorian pattern. But the matching was too precise, too perfect. Even the size and shape of the ruby appeared identical. As she served Victoria's appetizer, Claire couldn't stop herself. "Mrs. Ashford, forgive me, but your locket is absolutely stunning. The rose engraving is exquisite." Victoria's hand went reflexively to the jewelry, her expression shifting from annoyance at the personal comment to something harder, more suspicious. "It's a family piece." "My sister has one just like it," Claire said, the words tumbling out before wisdom could stop them. "The rose gold, the ruby, even the pearl halo. The engraving is identical, every petal and leaf. Our mother said it was passed down from our great-grandmother." The wine glass in Victoria's hand stopped halfway to her lips. She set it down with controlled precision, her eyes boring into Claire with sudden, frightening intensity. "What did you say your name was?" "Claire Donovan." "Donovan," Victoria repeated, testing the name like it was something bitter. "And your mother's name?" "Sarah Donovan. She passed away 3 years ago from complications of diabetes." Victoria's face had gone pale beneath her expertly applied makeup. The executives at her table had fallen silent, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Victoria stood abruptly, her napkin dropping to the floor. "Come with me," she commanded, her voice brooking no argument. "Now." Claire followed Victoria to one of the club's private conference rooms, her pulse racing. The older woman closed the door and turned on her with barely controlled fury. "Where did your mother get that locket?" "I told you, it was passed down through her family. From her grandmother, Margaret Sullivan." Victoria's composure cracked. She gripped the back of a leather chair, her knuckles white. "Margaret Sullivan? Oh my God, you're her granddaughter. Did you know my great-grandmother?" "Know her?" Victoria laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "She was my mother." The room tilted. Claire grabbed the edge of the conference table to steady herself. "That's impossible. My great-grandmother married Patrick Sullivan in 1948. She never mentioned—" "Patrick Sullivan was her second husband," Victoria interrupted, her voice shaking. "She married him after she abandoned me, after she gave me up to save herself." The accusation hung in the air, impossible and yet undeniable. If Victoria was telling the truth, then Margaret Sullivan, Claire's beloved great-grandmother, who had died when Claire was 10, had given up a daughter for adoption before starting her real family. "I don't understand," Claire whispered. Victoria pulled her phone from her purse and opened a photo album. She found what she was looking for and thrust the phone at Claire. The image showed a young woman in 1940s clothing, holding an infant. The woman's face was unmistakable. Claire had seen the same photograph in her mother's albums. It was Margaret Sullivan as a young woman. "That's me," Victoria said, pointing to the baby. "Born in 1952, given up for adoption 3 months later. My adoptive parents were Frank and Elizabeth Ashford. They told me I was adopted when I was 16, and I spent years tracking down my biological mother. When I finally found Margaret Sullivan, she was married with 2 children, your grandmother being one of them. She refused to acknowledge me, said I would destroy her family if anyone found out about her past." Claire sank into a chair, her mind reeling. "What did she do?" "She paid me off," Victoria said coldly. "Gave me $50,000, more money than I'd ever seen, and told me to disappear. She said if I ever tried to contact her family, she'd tell everyone I was lying, that I was trying to extort her. So I took the money, used it to put myself through college, and built my life without her. But the lockets, she had 2 made when I was born. One for me, one for herself. She kept hers as a reminder, I suppose. Some twisted maternal sentiment. She gave mine to my adoptive parents, told them it was the only thing from my biological family I should ever have." Claire's thoughts turned immediately to Emma, lying in a hospital bed across town, wearing the locket that represented a family history they'd never truly understood. "My mother never mentioned any of this, because Margaret never told her," Victoria said bitterly. "She buried me like an embarrassing mistake, built her perfect life, raised her children, and never once looked back at the daughter she threw away." The anger in Victoria's voice was decades old, calcified into something hard and unforgiving. Claire understood suddenly why the woman had built such an impenetrable empire. She'd spent her entire life proving she didn't need the family that had rejected her. "Mrs. Ashford, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine how painful that must have been." "Don't!" Victoria snapped. "Don't pity me. I built Ashford Industries from nothing. I became more successful than anyone in the Sullivan family ever dreamed of being. I proved I didn't need them. Claire stood slowly. I should get back to work. I'm sorry I brought this up. Wait. Victoria's voice stopped her at the door. Your sister, the one with the locket. What's wrong with her? Ovarian cancer. Stage 4. She's on an experimental immunotherapy protocol. Victoria's expression was unreadable. Which protocol? Immunotherapy 7 through Boston Medical. It's showing promising results, but insurance won't cover it. We're paying out of pocket. That's one of my company's trials, Victoria said quietly. Ashford Industries developed Immunotherapy 7. The irony was crushing. Emma's life was being saved by treatments developed by the woman who was simultaneously their great-aunt and a complete stranger. Claire didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I need to go, Claire said, fleeing the conference room before the emotions overwhelming her could spill out. She finished her shift in a daze, mechanically serving courses and refilling wine glasses while her mind spun with impossible revelations. When she finally clocked out at midnight, she drove straight to Boston Medical, where Emma was sleeping in a private room, paid for by maxing out Claire's credit cards. Emma woke as Claire entered, her pale face lighting up with a weak smile. Even after months of treatment, she maintained a gentle beauty, her auburn hair growing back in soft curls, her green eyes still holding hope despite everything. You're late, Emma said. Good tips tonight? Claire sat on the edge of the bed, taking her sister's hand. The ruby locket gleamed at Emma's throat, the rose engraving catching the dim hospital lighting. Em, I need to tell you something about this locket, about our family. She told Emma everything, Victoria Ashford's revelation, Margaret Sullivan's secret daughter, the abandonment and payoff. Emma listened in stunned silence, her fingers unconsciously touching the locket. So great-grandma Margaret gave up a baby, Emma said slowly. And that baby became Victoria Ashford. It looks that way. Does that make Victoria our... What? Great-aunt? Technically, yes, though she clearly wants nothing to do with us. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing. Claire, do you realize what this means? If Victoria Ashford is our great-aunt, and she's the CEO of Ashford Industries, she could... No, Claire interrupted firmly. We're not asking her for anything. She was abandoned by our family once. We're not going to exploit her for money now. I wasn't going to suggest that, Emma said softly. I was going to say she could tell us about the medical trials, about what comes next if Immunotherapy 7 stops working. She'd know better than anyone what my options are. Claire looked at her sister, practical even in the face of terminal illness, always thinking 3 steps ahead. You want to contact her? I want to understand where we come from, Emma said. Good and bad. And maybe she deserves to know she has family who doesn't see her as a mistake. What Claire and Emma didn't know was that Victoria Ashford had spent the past 3 hours in her penthouse apartment, staring at photographs of Margaret Sullivan and wrestling with emotions she'd thought long buried. And she'd made a decision that would change all their lives forever. The next morning, Claire received a call from an unknown number. She answered warily, expecting a spam caller. Miss Donovan, this is Helen Park, Chief Legal Counsel for Ashford Industries. Mrs. Ashford has requested a meeting with you and your sister at her office tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Are you available? Claire's heart raced. What is this about? Mrs. Ashford will explain everything during the meeting. Should I confirm your attendance? Claire looked across the hospital room at Emma, who nodded eagerly despite her weakness. We'll be there. Ashford Industries occupied a gleaming modern tower in Boston's Seaport district. The lobby was all marble and steel, with the company's logo, a stylized medical caduceus combined with an A, dominating the wall behind the reception desk. Claire and Emma arrived 15 minutes early, Emma using a wheelchair, despite her protests that she could walk. Helen Park met them in the lobby, a severe woman in her 50s, wearing a designer suit and an expression that suggested she'd seen every form of human deviousness. Follow me, please. Victoria's office occupied the entire top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided 360-degree views of Boston Harbor and the city beyond. The furniture was minimalist and expensive, the artwork on the walls worth more than Claire's annual salary. Victoria stood at the windows, her back to them, wearing another perfectly tailored suit. "Mrs. Ashford, they're here," Helen announced. Victoria turned, and Claire was struck by how exhausted she looked. The formidable CEO from the club had been replaced by an elderly woman, carrying the weight of complicated emotions. "Thank you, Helen. Please close the door on your way out." After Helen left, Victoria approached Emma's wheelchair, studying the younger woman with an intensity that made Claire protective. "You look like her," Victoria said finally. "Like Margaret. Same bone structure, same eyes. I've seen the photographs," Emma replied. "People always said I favored her." Victoria gestured to the seating area, a collection of leather chairs arranged around a coffee table. Claire pushed Emma's wheelchair over, and they settled into an uncomfortable silence. "I've spent 50 years hating Margaret Sullivan," Victoria began without preamble. "Hating her for abandoning me, for choosing her perfect life over her own daughter. I built my entire identity around not needing the family that rejected me. And now here you are, her descendants wearing the locket she gave away, struggling with the exact kind of medical crisis that my company exists to solve." "Mrs. Ashford, we're not here to ask for anything," Claire started. "But I want to give you something," Victoria interrupted. "I want to cover Emma's treatment costs, all of them. Immunotherapy 7 through completion, and whatever comes next." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Why?" "Because Margaret Sullivan made a choice 50 years ago to pretend I didn't exist. And I won't make the same choice now. You're my family, whether I like it or not. And family takes care of each other." The offer was staggering. Claire's mind immediately calculated the financial relief. No more maxed-out credit cards, no more choosing between rent and medication, no more panic about what happened when the money ran out. But Emma's expression was troubled. "Mrs. Ashford, I appreciate the offer more than I can express. But I need to know something first. Immunotherapy 7, is it actually working? Or are you just keeping me on the trial because you can?" Victoria's face tightened. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if the treatment is genuinely helping, or if I'm just a data point in a clinical trial that's already failed." The silence stretched out, heavy and damning. Victoria looked away, staring out at the harbor view. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "The trial results aren't what we hoped. Immunotherapy 7 shows initial promise, but the cancer eventually develops resistance. We're seeing diminishing returns after the 4th treatment cycle." Claire felt her world collapsing. "Emma's on her 5th cycle." "I know," Victoria said. "Her oncologist knows too. They're keeping her on the protocol because stopping means accepting there are no other options." Emma's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. "How long?" "Without treatment, 4 to 6 months. With treatment, maybe 8. The drug is buying time, but it's not curing you." The truth hit like a physical blow. Claire had been working herself to exhaustion, drowning in debt, sacrificing everything to pay for treatments that were ultimately only delaying the inevitable. She'd thought they were fighting for Emma's life. They'd been fighting for a few extra months. Why didn't her doctors tell us? Claire demanded, anger replacing shock. "Because you're private pay patients, not official trial participants. The hospital has no obligation to share internal trial data with you. You're buying access to an experimental drug, not enrolling in a study with full disclosure." The ethical implications were staggering. Ashford Industries had developed a drug that didn't work, then allowed desperate patients to pay tens of thousands of dollars for false hope. "That's medical fraud," Claire said. "That's unregulated medical experimentation," Victoria corrected coldly. "Perfectly legal for private pay patients outside formal trials. Morally reprehensible, but legal." Emma's hand found Claire's, squeezing weakly. "So this is it. This is all the time I have." Victoria's composure cracked. She turned away from them, her shoulders shaking with emotion she'd spent a lifetime learning to suppress. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You deserve to know the truth before now." Claire stood up, rage and grief warring in her chest. "You're going to make this right. You're going to expose what Ashford Industries did. Admit that you've been selling false hope to dying patients." "I can't do that," Victoria said, still facing away. "The company would be destroyed. Thousands of employees would lose their jobs. Decades of legitimate medical research would be tainted. So you're going to let people keep dying while you take their money?" Victoria turned back, her face streaked with tears that shocked Claire more than any words could have. The formidable CEO was crying openly, decades of suppressed emotion finally breaking through. "You don't understand what you're asking. Ashford Industries is my legacy. It's proof that I didn't need Margaret Sullivan's family, that I could build something meaningful without them. If I expose the Immunotherapy 7 fraud, I destroy everything I've spent 50 years building. And if you don't," Emma said quietly, "you become exactly what Margaret was, someone who abandons family to protect themselves." The comparison hit Victoria like a slap. She staggered backward, sinking into one of the leather chairs. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Victoria pulled out her phone and made a call. "Helen, call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Full board, no exceptions. Tell them I'm making a major announcement about the Immunotherapy 7 trial." She hung up and looked at Claire and Emma with exhausted resignation. "You're right. I've spent my life proving I was better than the family that abandoned me. It's time I actually prove it." The emergency board meeting at Ashford Industries was scheduled for 9 o'clock the next morning. By 8:30, rumors were already circulating through Boston's business community. Something major was happening at one of the city's most respected pharmaceutical companies. Claire and Emma arrived at 8:45, accompanied by Helen Park, who had spent the previous evening briefing them on what to expect. The boardroom was an intimidating space dominated by a massive table and portraits of previous Ashford Industries leaders. Victoria was already there, looking like she'd aged a decade overnight. Around the table sat 12 board members, a mixture of medical professionals, business executives, and major investors. They looked at Claire and Emma with open confusion and hostility. "Victoria, what the hell is this?" demanded Ronald Chen, the board chairman and largest shareholder. "We don't bring outsiders to board meetings." "These women are my family," Victoria said simply. "And what I'm about to tell you affects them directly. For the next 30 minutes, Victoria laid out everything. The Immunotherapy 7 trial failures, the private pay patients being given false hope, the financial exploitation of desperate families. She presented internal trial data showing the drug's diminishing effectiveness, correspondence from research directors recommending the trial be terminated, and financial records showing how much money the company had made from patients who didn't know they were paying for a failed treatment. The boardroom erupted into chaos. "You're committing corporate suicide," shouted Margaret Winters, the CFO. "If this information goes public, we'll face lawsuits from every patient family, regulatory investigations, criminal charges for fraud." "I'm aware of the consequences," Victoria said calmly. "That's why I'm resigning as CEO, effective immediately. I take full responsibility for allowing this to continue." "Resigning?" Ronald stood up, his face flushed with anger. "Victoria, you built this company. You can't just walk away." "I can, and I will. But before I go, I'm making sure the truth comes out. We're going to contact every private pay patient on Immunotherapy 7, refund their treatment costs, and publicly acknowledge that we gave them false hope." "That will bankrupt us," Margaret shouted. "Then we deserve to be bankrupt," Victoria replied. "We betrayed the fundamental mission of this company, to heal people, not profit from their desperation." The board dissolved into arguments and accusations. Several members threatened to sue Victoria personally. Others began calculating the financial damage and how to minimize it. Claire and Emma sat silent witnesses to the implosion of a billion-dollar empire, all because Victoria Ashford had chosen truth over self-preservation. Finally, Ronald called for order. "Victoria, I understand you're having some kind of moral crisis, but you can't destroy this company because of two women who showed up claiming to be your family. How do we even know they're legitimate relatives? Victoria pulled a folder from her briefcase. I had DNA testing done yesterday. Emergency processing. Results came back this morning. Claire and Emma Donovan are conclusively my great-nieces, descended from Margaret Sullivan, who was my biological mother. She slid the DNA results across the table. Ronald examined them, his expression growing more troubled with each page.
So what?
He said finally. They're family. That doesn't mean you get to destroy the company out of some misplaced guilt. This isn't about guilt, Victoria said. It's about looking at Emma, a 26-year-old woman dying of cancer, and realizing that every dollar she paid for false hope was a dollar I helped steal from her. It's about understanding that I became exactly what I hated most, someone who hurts vulnerable people to protect their own interests. Emma spoke up for the first time, her voice weak but clear. Mr. Chen, I'm going to die in less than a year. Immunotherapy 7 isn't saving me. It's just giving me expensive false hope. How many other families are going through what mine is going through? How many other people are draining their savings for a treatment that doesn't work? That's the nature of experimental medicine, Ronald said defensively. Some treatments work, others don't. Everyone who signs up for trials knows the risks. But we're not trial participants, Claire interjected. We're customers, and you're selling us a product you know doesn't work. The distinction was crucial, and everyone in the room knew it. Clinical trial participants accepted risk in exchange for advancement of medical science. Private pay patients were consumers purchasing a treatment, with the expectation it had reasonable chances of success. Selling a known failed treatment to desperate patients wasn't research, it was fraud. Helen Park spoke up from her position at the side of the room. As General Counsel, I need to advise that Miss Donovan is correct. Our current practices with private pay immunotherapy 7 patients expose the company to significant legal liability. If even one family sues and discovers the internal trial data, we'll face a massive class action lawsuit. Then we bury the data, suggested Mitchell Ross, the head of research and development. Classify it as proprietary information. Claim it's still being analyzed. By the time anyone can force disclosure through litigation, the trial will be over, and the data will be published through normal channels. Victoria stared at Mitchell like she'd never seen him before. You're suggesting we continue lying to dying patients so we can extract a few more months of revenue? I'm suggesting we protect the company and its thousands of employees, Mitchell shot back. Your personal crisis doesn't give you the right to destroy everything we've built. The meeting deteriorated into a vote. Ronald called for Victoria's immediate removal as CEO, citing erratic behavior and decision-making compromised by personal emotional issues. The vote was 9-3 in favor of removal. Effective immediately, you are no longer CEO of Ashford Industries, Ronald announced. Security will escort you from the building. Helen, please ensure all company property is returned. Victoria stood with dignity, gathering her briefcase. You're making a mistake. This will come out eventually, and when it does, everyone in this room will be held accountable. Get out, Ronald said coldly. Claire and Emma followed Victoria out of the boardroom, past security guards who treated the former CEO like a criminal. They rode down the elevator in silence, emerging into the lobby where dozens of employees were already whispering about the boardroom drama. Outside the building, Victoria paused on the sidewalk, looking up at the tower that bore her name. I built that, she said quietly. 50 years of work and they took it in 5 minutes. You did the right thing, Emma said. The right thing, Victoria laughed bitterly. I spent my entire life doing the strategic thing, the profitable thing, the smart thing. The one time I try to do the right thing, I lose everything. Not everything, Claire said. You have us, for whatever that's worth. Victoria looked at the 2 young women, strangers a week ago, family now through blood and shared crisis. It's worth more than you know. Come on. We need to figure out our next move. They went to a coffee shop across from Boston Medical. The 3 of them crowded into a booth. Emma was exhausted from the morning's drama, her energy fading visibly. Claire ordered soup and tea, trying to get some nutrition into her sister. "What happens now?" Claire asked Victoria. "The board will try to bury everything I revealed. They'll classify the immunotherapy data as confidential, pressure the researchers into silence, and continue selling false hope until they're forced to stop." "Can't you go public? Tell the media what's happening?" Victoria shook her head. "I signed confidentiality agreements. If I disclose proprietary company information, they'll sue me into oblivion. I'll lose my severance package, my stock options, probably my house." "So they just win," Emma said, stirring her tea weakly. "They get to keep hurting people, and there's nothing we can do." Victoria was silent for a long moment, thinking. Then her expression shifted, the formidable executive returning. "There might be one thing. Helen Park works for the company, but she's also bound by legal ethics. If she becomes aware of ongoing fraud, she's obligated to report it. And unlike me, her duty to prevent harm supersedes any confidentiality agreement." "Will she do it?" Claire asked. "I don't know, but it's worth trying." Victoria pulled out her phone and called Helen. The conversation was brief and cryptic. When she hung up, Victoria was smiling grimly. "She'll meet us tonight at my place. She says if I can prove ongoing fraud, not just failed research, but active concealment of known dangers to patients, she'll file a report with the State Medical Board." That evening, in Victoria's penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor, the three women waited for Helen Park. The apartment was spectacular, modern furniture, museum-quality art, floor-to-ceiling windows. But it felt hollow somehow, a beautiful shell without warmth. Helen arrived at 8, looking nervous and professional. "Victoria, I want to make it clear that I'm here as a lawyer, concerned about ethical violations, not as your friend or ally. If you're asking me to breach my duties to the company, I won't do it." "I understand," Victoria said. "But I think what I'm about to show you will clarify that your duty is to prevent harm, not protect the company." Victoria opened her laptop and pulled up files she'd downloaded before being escorted from the building. Internal emails, research reports, financial analyses. She'd violated her confidentiality agreements by taking the data, but she'd decided truth was more important than legal protection. The emails were damning. Research directors explicitly recommending immunotherapy be terminated as a failed trial. Marketing executives celebrating private pay. Revenue from unregulated medical consumers. Board meeting minutes, discussing how to maximize profit from desperate patients. Before trial closure was announced, Helen read through everything, her expression growing darker. "This is worse than I thought. They're not just selling an experimental drug. They're actively concealing known ineffectiveness from paying patients. That crosses the line from research into fraud. Will you report it?" Victoria asked. Helen was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with the decision that would end her career at Ashford Industries. "Yes, I'll file with the State Medical Board tomorrow morning. They'll launch an investigation, and once that starts, everything comes out." Emma spoke up from the couch where she'd been resting. "How long will the investigation take?" "Weeks, maybe months," Helen admitted. "Medical board investigations are thorough but slow. I don't have months," Emma said simply. The statement hung in the air, a stark reminder of what this was really about. Not corporate scandal or family drama, but a young woman dying while institutions moved at bureaucratic pace. Claire felt something shift inside her, a decision crystallizing with absolute clarity. "Then we don't wait for institutions. We go directly to the patients." Victoria and Helen both turned to stare at her. "What do you mean?" Victoria asked. "There must be a list of every private pay patient on immunotherapy. We contact them directly. Tell them the truth about the trial results. Give them the internal data so they can make informed decisions about their treatment." "That would be a massive breach of patient confidentiality," Helen said. "The company would sue everyone involved." "Let them sue," Claire said. "By the time the lawsuits conclude, Emma will be dead. I'd rather spend the rest of my life paying legal judgments than watch her die, knowing I could have saved other families from the same exploitation. Emma was crying now, tears streaming down her pale face. Claire, you can't sacrifice your future for this. Yes, I can, Claire said firmly. Because you've spent the last year sacrificing yourself by staying on a treatment you knew wasn't working, just to give me hope. It's my turn to fight for something that matters. Victoria stood up and walked to her window, staring out at the city lights. When she turned back, her face held a resolve that reminded Claire why this woman had built an empire. I have access to the patient database. It's stored on company servers, but I still have my login credentials. They won't think to shut them down until tomorrow. I can pull the complete list of private pay immunotherapy 7 patients. Victoria, they'll destroy you, Helen warned. Criminal charges for unauthorized access, civil suits for breach of confidentiality, SEC investigations, if there's any suggestion of corporate sabotage. You'll lose everything. I already lost everything that mattered, Victoria said. When I walked out of that boardroom today, I lost the company I built. But I haven't lost my integrity yet, and these patients deserve to know what they're paying for. Over the next 3 hours, they built their plan. Victoria accessed the patient database and exported a complete list. 47 private pay patients across 8 states, all paying for immunotherapy 7 treatments. Helen drafted a disclosure letter explaining the trial's failure and offering the internal research data. Claire set up a secure email account for sending the information. At midnight, they pressed send. 47 emails, each containing a truth bomb that would end careers and potentially destroy Ashford Industries. Then they waited. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By morning, 3 patients had contacted lawyers. By afternoon, a family in Connecticut had gone to the media with their story. By evening, the Massachusetts Attorney General's office announced an investigation into Ashford Industries for medical fraud. The company's stock price collapsed, losing 60% of its value in a single trading day. Board members resigned. The FDA announced an emergency review of all Ashford Industries trials. And most importantly, the 47 patients on immunotherapy 7 were given the truth about their prognosis and could make informed decisions about how to spend their remaining time. Victoria Ashford sat in her penthouse, watching the news coverage of her company's implosion. Claire and Emma were there with her, the 3 of them having formed an unexpected family unit in the chaos. "I'm sorry," Emma said quietly. "I'm sorry we destroyed what you built." Victoria turned from the window, and Claire was startled to see her smiling. "You didn't destroy anything that mattered. Ashford Industries was built on innovation and healing. Somewhere along the way, it became about profit and power. What we destroyed was a corrupt institution that betrayed its founding mission. The families who worked there, they'll lose their jobs," Claire pointed out. "Some will," Victoria acknowledged. "But the company will survive in some form. New leadership, new mission, renewed commitment to actual healing instead of profit extraction. Sometimes things need to be burned down before they can be rebuilt properly." Over the next weeks, the investigations multiplied. The Attorney General's office uncovered a pattern of exploitation across multiple Ashford Industries trials. The FDA suspended all company research pending ethical review, and a class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of every patient who had paid for treatments they weren't fully informed about. Victoria was charged with unauthorized computer access and breach of confidentiality. The charges were eventually dropped when prosecutors realized she'd exposed systematic fraud, but her legal fees were crushing. She sold her penthouse, liquidated her assets, and faced bankruptcy for the first time since her 20s. Through it all, she spent increasing amounts of time with Claire and Emma, building the family relationship that Margaret Sullivan had denied her 50 years earlier. She was there when Emma stopped all treatments, choosing hospice care over futile medical interventions. She was there for quiet dinners and late-night conversations about life, death, and the choices that define us. 6 months after the Beacon Club dinner that had started everything, Emma Donovan passed away peacefully in a hospice facility overlooking Boston Harbor. She was surrounded by Claire, Victoria, and Helen Park, the unlikely family they'd become through crisis and shared commitment to truth. Emma's funeral was small but meaningful. Victoria paid for everything, insisting it was the least she could do. At the service, Claire spoke about her sister's courage, her refusal to accept comfortable lies, her determination to ensure other families wouldn't suffer the same exploitation. "Emma taught me that truth matters more than comfort," Claire said, her voice breaking. She knew immunotherapy 7 wasn't saving her, but she fought anyway, not for herself, but for the 46 other patients who deserved to know what they were facing. "That's the legacy she leaves behind." Victoria spoke as well, her words carefully chosen. "I spent 50 years running from the family that rejected me, building walls around my heart to protect myself from being hurt again." Emma and Claire broke through those walls in a matter of weeks. They showed me that family isn't about bloodlines or legacies. It's about choosing to stand together when standing alone would be easier. Emma chose truth over comfort, justice over peace, and in doing so, she saved lives I had endangered through my cowardice. I will spend the rest of my life trying to honor that choice. After the funeral, Claire and Victoria scattered Emma's ashes in Boston Harbor. The ruby locket, the catalyst for everything, tucked safely in Claire's pocket. They stood on the pier as the sun set, watching the ashes drift away on the tide. "What will you do now?" Victoria asked. Claire was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. I spent the last year fighting for Emma's life, then fighting to expose Ashford Industries. Now that both fights are over, I feel lost." "You could come work for me," Victoria offered. "I'm starting a new company, non-profit, focused on patient advocacy and medical transparency, making sure what happened with immunotherapy 7 never happens again. I could use someone with your determination and moral clarity." "You're starting over? At 72? Victoria smiled. Margaret Sullivan spent her life building a perfect facade while hiding the messy truth of her past. I spent my life building an empire while hiding the messy truth of my origins. Maybe it's time to build something honest for once, even if it's smaller and less impressive." "What about your legal troubles?" "The criminal charges were dropped, but the civil suits will drag on for years. I'll probably lose what's left of my money. But money was never what I actually needed. I just thought it was because I spent 50 years trying to prove I didn't need the family that rejected me." Claire pulled the ruby locket from her pocket, holding it up to catch the last rays of sunlight. The rose engraving gleamed, the ruby glowing like captured fire. "Emma wanted you to have this. She said it should go to family, and your family." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I can't take that. It's all you have left of her." "It's not all I have," Claire said firmly. "I have her courage, her integrity, her refusal to accept injustice. And those things don't need a locket to survive. But you spent your whole life separated from this piece of your mother. You deserve to have it." Victoria took the locket with trembling hands, running her fingers over the rose engraving, just as Claire had done thousands of times. "She was right to give me up, you know. Margaret Sullivan. I've spent 50 years hating her for it, but she was 19, unmarried with no resources. What choice did she have?" "She had the choice to acknowledge you later," Claire said. "When she was established, when admitting you wouldn't have destroyed her life. She chose comfort over truth. You chose the opposite, and look where it got me. Bankrupt, disgraced, standing on a pier, scattering ashes. Standing with family," Claire corrected. "Building something that matters. That's more than Margaret ever had." They stood together as darkness fell over Boston Harbor, two women connected by blood and choice, bound by shared loss and shared commitment to truth. The ruby locket hung between them, no longer a symbol of abandonment, but of connection, proof that families could be rebuilt, that mistakes could be acknowledged, that it was never too late to choose integrity over comfort. 1 year after Emma's death, Claire stood in the offices of the Ashford Patient Advocacy Foundation, watching as the first group of medical advocacy volunteers received their training. The foundation occupied modest space in a converted warehouse, nothing like the gleaming tower Victoria had once commanded, but infinitely more meaningful. Victoria entered carrying coffee, her designer suits replaced by practical business casual, her authoritative demeanor softened by genuine warmth. At 73, she seemed younger than when Claire had first met her, lighter, freed from the burden of maintaining an empire built on compromise principles. The Massachusetts Medical Board just approved our patient advocate certification program, Victoria announced. We can officially start placing advocates in hospitals across the state to help families navigate treatment decisions and understand clinical trial data. Emma would be proud, Claire said. She'd probably tell us we're moving too slowly, Victoria replied with a smile. Remember how impatient she was? Always pushing for the next step before we'd finish the current one. They'd learned to talk about Emma this way, present in memory, acknowledged in their work, but no longer a raw wound. Grief had transformed into purpose, loss into legacy. The foundation had grown beyond their initial vision. In addition to patient advocacy, they'd established a whistleblower protection fund for medical professionals who exposed corporate malfeasance, a research ethics oversight committee staffed by former patients, and a public database of clinical trial results that made it impossible for companies to hide failed research. The work had attracted attention beyond Boston. Congressional hearings on pharmaceutical transparency had cited their database. The FDA had implemented new disclosure requirements based on their recommendations. And most importantly, thousands of patients now had access to honest information about their treatment options. Helen Park had left Ashford Industries after filing her report with the medical board, joining the foundation as general counsel. She entered the office now carrying a legal brief. Claire, you need to see this. The class action settlement against Ashford Industries was just approved. $47 million split among the Immunotherapy 7 patients and their families. Claire took the document, scanning the details. How much does Emma's estate receive? About $800,000, which according to her will goes entirely to you. The money felt like blood money, compensation for a life that should never have been lost. But Claire knew what Emma would want her to do with it. Put it in the foundation's endowment. Use it to help other families avoid what we went through. Victoria nodded approvingly. That's exactly what she would have wanted. As Helen left to process the paperwork, Claire's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number with a Massachusetts area code. She answered warily. Miss Donovan, this is Dr. Rachel Foster from Harvard Medical School. I'm reaching out because I was one of the research directors on the Immunotherapy 7 trial. I'm the one who recommended termination, and I was ignored. I wanted to thank you for exposing what happened. You don't need to thank me, Dr. Foster. You tried to do the right thing. But I stopped fighting when the company pressured me to stay silent. You didn't stop, and because of that, the medical research community is having long overdue conversations about ethics, transparency, and the exploitation of desperate patients. She paused. I'm calling because I'm starting a new research initiative, genuinely patient-centered oncology research with full transparency and ethical oversight. I'd like the Foundation's involvement in designing the protocols. Would you be interested? Claire looked at Victoria, who had been listening to the conversation. The older woman nodded encouragingly. Yes, Dr. Foster, we'd be very interested. After the call ended, Claire walked to the window overlooking Boston. The city stretched out before her, millions of lives intersecting in complex patterns of connection and conflict. Somewhere out there, patients were fighting for their lives. Doctors were wrestling with ethical dilemmas. Companies were choosing between profit and principle. And here, in this modest office, 3 women who had been strangers 18 months ago were working to ensure that truth would have a fighting chance against power. Do you ever regret it? Claire asked Victoria. Giving up everything you built. Victoria joined her at the window, the ruby locket visible at her throat. Every single day, and I'd do it again every single day, because what I built was impressive but hollow. She gestured around the foundation office. "This actually matters." "We're not going to save everyone," Claire said. "People are still going to die. Companies are still going to prioritize profit. The system is still broken, but it's slightly less broken than it was," Victoria replied. "Emma didn't save herself, but she saved others. That's all any of us can do. Make the world slightly better than we found it, and hope the next generation continues the work." As evening settled over Boston, the foundation staff departed, leaving Claire and Victoria alone in the office. They developed a routine, ending each day by updating Emma's memorial board, adding new stories of patients helped, policies changed, lives saved. Today's edition was a letter from a woman in Colorado whose daughter had been considering immunotherapy 7. Because of the Foundation's database, she'd learned about the trial's failure and chosen a different treatment path. The daughter was responding well, her cancer in remission. "One life saved," Claire said, pinning the letter to the board. "Mao and Titi. That's what this is all about." Victoria stood beside her, studying the hundreds of letters and photos covering the board, a visual testament to the ripple effects of their choice to tell the truth. "Margaret Sullivan gave me up to protect her reputation. I built Ashford Industries to prove I didn't need her validation. And in the end, the only thing that matters is this: real people really helped, because someone was willing to sacrifice comfort for truth." They turned off the lights and locked the office, walking out into the Boston night. The city hummed around them, indifferent to their small victories and enormous sacrifices. But they weren't working for the city's recognition. They were working for the Emmas of the world, the patients fighting impossible battles, the families drowning in medical debt, the people who deserved honest answers, even when those answers were painful. 5 years after Emma's death, Claire stood in the same hospice facility where her sister had died, but this time as a visitor bringing comfort rather than receiving it. The Ashford Patient Advocacy Foundation had established a hospice advocacy program, ensuring end-of-life patients understood their options and weren't pressured into futile treatments. Victoria had passed away 3 months earlier at 76. Her body worn out, but her spirit finally at peace. She'd left everything to the foundation, not the fortune she'd once commanded, but the modest savings she'd accumulated in her final years. More importantly, she'd left a legacy of redemption, proving it was never too late to choose integrity over self-interest. Claire wore both ruby lockets now, Emma's and Victoria's, on a single chain. The matching pieces had been reunited at last, just as the family they represented had been brought together through crisis and choice. At the hospice facility, Claire met with a family facing the same decision she'd confronted with Emma: continue expensive treatments that weren't working or transition to comfort care. The mother was adamant that her daughter keep fighting. The daughter was exhausted, ready to stop. "My sister was on immunotherapy 7, Claire told them quietly. "An experimental cancer treatment that wasn't working, but that we paid for anyway, because we couldn't face the truth. We spent her last months fighting instead of living. I wish I could go back and choose differently," the mother's eyes filled with tears. "It says in smetchodadine. But what if the treatment works? What if giving up means losing the chance at a miracle?" "Miracles happen," Claire acknowledged. "But so does prolonged suffering in pursuit of miracles that never come. The question isn't whether to hope, it's how to spend the time you have. My sister's last weeks were spent fighting legal battles and exposing corporate fraud. That's what she chose. But she told me before she died that if she'd known earlier her treatment wasn't working, she would have spent that time differently, traveling, writing letters, making memories instead of making bills." The daughter reached for her mother's hand. "I want to stop, Mom. I want to spend whatever time I have left living, not dying in a hospital." It was a conversation Claire had dozens of times, helping families face impossible truths, supporting them through decisions no one should have to make. The work was heartbreaking and necessary, a direct line from Emma's sacrifice to these present moments of clarity and choice. As Claire left the hospice that evening, she received a text from Dr. Rachel Foster, Patient trial results just published. New protocol showing 40% improvement in survival rates with full transparency and ethical oversight. Emma's legacy continues. Claire stood in the parking lot, looking up at the Boston sky where stars were beginning to emerge. Somewhere up there, she liked to imagine Emma and Victoria together. The young woman who'd refused to accept comfortable lies, and the older woman who'd finally learned to choose truth over power. The ruby lockets felt warm against her chest, their weight a constant reminder of the price of truth and the value of integrity. Margaret Sullivan had commissioned them as symbols of a love she'd been too afraid to acknowledge. Victoria had carried hers as a reminder of abandonment. Emma had worn hers as a connection to family history. And now Claire wore both, symbols not of what had been lost, but of what had been found, that families could be rebuilt, that truth could triumph over power, that one person's courage could ripple outward in ways that saved lives and changed systems. She drove home through Boston's streets, past the building that had once housed Ashford Industries, now occupied by a medical ethics research institute. Past the Beacon Club, where a casual comment about a locket had started everything. Past Boston Medical, where Emma had spent her final months. The city was full of ghosts: Margaret Sullivan, Victoria Ashford, Emma Donovan, all the patients who died because profit mattered more than truth. But it was also full of possibility: patients empowered with honest information, researchers committed to ethical practice, advocates fighting for transparency. Claire had started as a cocktail waitress, struggling to pay her sister's medical bills. She'd become a whistleblower, a patient advocate, and the keeper of a legacy built on sacrifice and truth. The journey had cost her everything: her sister, her financial stability, her simple, uncomplicated life. And she would do it all again without hesitation, because some things were worth more than comfort. Truth was worth more. Justice was worth more. And the courage to choose what was right over what was easy was worth more than all the ruby lockets in the world. What began as a chance encounter at an exclusive Boston club became a story about how truth can shatter comfortable lies, how families can be found in the most unexpected places, and how one person's refusal to stay silent can transform broken systems. Claire Donovan proved that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about choosing integrity, even when fear demands silence. Victoria Ashford discovered that redemption is possible at any age, that legacies built on lies eventually crumble, and that the family she'd spent 50 years trying to prove she didn't need was exactly what she'd been missing. And Emma Donovan, who died too young but not in vain, showed that how we spend our final months matters as much as how we spend our lives. The ruby lockets remain, passed down now to Claire's future children, symbols of a complicated family history that includes abandonment and reunion, exploitation and justice, loss and love. They're reminders that truth always costs something, but silence costs more. That power will always try to protect itself, but courage can still win. And that sometimes the most important legacy we leave isn't wealth or status, but the simple choice to tell the truth, even when lying would be easier. If this story of medical ethics, family redemption, and the courage to expose injustice moved you, remember that similar battles are being fought right now in hospitals, boardrooms, and families across the country. Patients deserve truth. Families deserve dignity. And we all deserve a medical system that values healing over profit. Stand up for transparency, demand accountability, and never let anyone convince you that comfortable lies are better than painful truths. Real change starts with one person refusing to look away.